McCaul of Texas. Good morning, Congressman. Welcome back.
Hey, good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm great. I want to talk to you primarily about the border, but I have to begin by asking about all right. Matthew McConaughey says he's thinking about running for governor in Texas. What do you make of that?
Well, certainly entertaining, right? Yeah, he lives down the street, and I know him. Never really thought he was going to get into politics, but he's always had a little bit of interest in it, and we'll see. We'll see.
Governor Abbott would be formidable. Is there an independent lane in Texas? Because if he runs as a Democrat, that's like putting 30 pounds on your back going up against Greg Abbott.
Yeah, and I think he leans conservative, but I'm not sure he'd be conservative enough in a Republican primary. And you're right, Abbott's pretty strong, and he's got a good, campaign cash on hand, and so I think he'd be a difficult one to beat.
What is the reaction to the power failure in Texas, Congressman McCaul? You're a fairly objective observer of politics. You have been for many, many years. Is there lasting damage to the Republican Party and to Governor Abbott because of that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of finger pointing. I think the governor and lieutenant governor want to start with a clean slate with the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT, which is our independent grid, make it more reliable, resilient. There are bills in the State House right now to winterize it, and that was a failure that happened. It was not winterized.
So that will happen soon before he runs for reelect. Last question on Texas politics. I'm just curious whether or not that made him vulnerable. I thought he was invulnerable. Now I wonder, is he vulnerable in a general election in 2022?
I say he still wins, but it is a vulnerability that someone could exploit. I think he's had criticisms on both sides about his handling of COVID, although I think his more recent announcements that open up the state helps him in the Republican primary. And, I think he's still very much the front runner.
Well, you ought to walk down the street and find out from Matthew whether or not he floated that idea on this show in November. And since then,
Yeah.
I think he's thinking about it. Now let's talk about the border. You're ranking member for the Republicans on the Homeland Security Committee. What is going on down there? I played all the audio. We know we have a crisis. What is going on?
Well, it's like a repeat of 2014. I mean, if you tell them they can stay, they're going to come, right? And I think the messaging has been awful. And you couple that with the president's rescinding the Remain in Mexico policy and the Northern Triangle policy. That essentially meant that you could not enter the United States. You had to apply for asylum, in Mexico, or if you came from Central America, the first safe country, and that would be Mexico as well. So that was being enforced. The Title 14 safety provisions due to COVID were being enforced. So we pretty much had it shut down in terms of political asylum. And then with the stroke of a pen, Biden completely reversed those policies. And then Secretary Mayorkas says something as dumb as, well, I'm not saying you can't come, just don't come right now. And those kind of messages, and I've been in this business for a long time, live in a border state. When you say that, those kind of things, the traffickers and the cartels, they pick up that language. And, they basically sent a green light to them. And now we got another crisis on the border, just like 2014.
This is a market-driven phenomenon, and I don't like to talk about refugees and people without anything and the clothes on their backs in the hands of coyotes as though it's a market mechanism. But it is driven by market economics. The cartels and the coyotes make money by peddling the message that the border is open. President Biden and his team amplified that message. Are they doing anything to change that message, Congressman McCaul?
No, they sent FEMA down. Obviously, it's a federal emergency management agency. It's saying it's an emergency. It's obviously a crisis. I haven't seen anything other than possibly sending more people down there to deal with the crisis. But I think you analyze the situation just spot on. It's a market-driven phenomenon. If you tell them they can stay, they're going to come, and that's what's happening. And when you're making $2,000 to $4,000 from Mexico, maybe up to $8,000 had from Central America, it's just, it's a money-making deal. It's a very dangerous journey for these children. Every time I go down there, it just breaks your heart to see these little kids who've been exploited. And so then what they're going to do is pick them up at the border, take them to a Health and Human Services facility, and then they relocate them into the United States. And I think there's a real health concern here as well from a COVID standpoint when you're just bringing in all these people, many of whom we know have COVID.
Now, Congressman McCaul, yesterday Ron Klain, and I've known Ron a long time, and he's a good guy, but he went on MSNBC to deal with this, and this was his answer to Mehdi Hassan asking him about the border crisis, cut number 4.
Of course it's an outrage, and it's unacceptable. We inherited a government that had allowed the number of beds to safely and humanely house these children, administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, had allowed it to shrink to a record low number. So now we have children arriving at these border patrol stations and no facilities, no safe, no legally licensed facilities with legally licensed staff to house the children. And so we are working night and day to increase that capacity that had been allowed to shrink, to create enough safe beds for the children, to create places where they can stay until we can reunite them with relatives here in the U.S. or with safe sponsors for them to stay permanently in the U.S. until they have their asylum hearings. So we're working very, very hard on this problem. We inherited a real lack of capacity. It's hard to ramp up that capacity. You can't just take children and put them in a hotel room. They need to be in a place where they are safely protected. They need to be in a place with staff. The staff needs to be trained. The staff needs to be licensed. These are very, challenging needs that we are rapidly moving to accelerate. But there's no question at this point in time, we have too many children in these border patrol stations.
So I call him President Klain because we don't see the president himself. What do you think, Congressman McCaul? What do you make of Ron Klain's explanation? It's all the Trump fault.
I think it's absolutely a false narrative because the reason why the bed space shrunk is because the numbers of crossings were going down. It was under control. When they created this crisis, then of course they're going to need more bed space. So I would argue that the only reason they need more bed space is because they've allowed these policies to go away through a stroke of a pen, and now they're all coming in. I mean, we wouldn't be dealing with this if President Biden had changed these policies that are encouraging the traffickers to manipulate these unaccompanied minors coming across the border. And, it's all about deterrence, cause and effect. I've seen this movie over and over again. The last one was 2014 when Obama was in office. He called it a humanitarian crisis. They did the same thing. President Trump came in. He built the infrastructure, the wall. He stopped this political asylum process, had to apply in Mexico, got it under control. I mean, is it any coincidence this whole thing happened within the first month or so of the Biden administration's term? I don't think so. It's a complete cause and effect of his policies, and that's why they need more bed space that they wouldn't need if they hadn't changed the policy.
How much worse, last question, Congressman McCaul, how much worse can it get? Because obviously it's a flood of people walking north now, including thousands of unaccompanied minors who are being taken there by coyotes. Their parents or their villages get the money necessary to send them north for the hope of a better life. How much larger can the flood tide become?
Much larger, and it will. And the message is going down to Central America. They are making the journey. These caravans are coming up. And I predict usually by summertime you start peaking. I was a federal prosecutor down here. I've seen it. And, it's going to start peaking, around summertime. You're going to see a spike in the spring going into the summer. If I'm guesstimating, it could be close to 1 million people trying to get in.
And what will they do? I mean, what do you do with 1 million people at your border? None of them tested, none of them in any way certain to be non-COVID positive.
It's chaos. It's a total crisis, and it turns the Border Patrol into babysitters and bus drivers, and it's all due to the policies. And we tried to fix this in Congress. We can get it passed, but we gotta change a lot of this stuff to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, before these children begin their journey, it's important for the Team Biden to message that they will not be allowed into the country, and if they don't, they will come. Mike McCaul, thank you, Congressman. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Remember, all right. Go see Matthew McConaughey.